Security Agency General Tim Haugh, Director of Defense Intelligence Agency Lieutenant General Jeffrey Kruse. Thank you all for being here. First, I want to address an issue that was made public earlier this week regarding a group text message exchange that included several members of President Trump's national security leadership team and a journalist. Yesterday, our colleagues on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence held their hearing on the annual threat assessment, and unfortunately, instead of exploring the real and existential threats that face our nation, which is the purpose of this hearing, this issue consumed most of their time. While I will address this topic further in my questions, it's my sincere hope that we use this hearing to discuss the many foreign threats facing our nation. I have deep concerns about the state of our national security. The war between Russia and Ukraine has just surpassed 3 years and now includes North Korean troops on the battlefield. Iran remains the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, supporting terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East like Hezbollah and Hamas, fueling the latter's war with Israel and Gaza. The threat of the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has metastasized worldwide, expanding a robust military and espionage capability well beyond the Pacific, including here within the Western Hemisphere. The CCP's aggressiveness in operations below the level of armed conflict continues to grow. For example, they have sponsored cyber attacks against United States critical infrastructure and even recruited a New York State governor's office employee into being an undisclosed agent of the CCP. And after 4 years of a catastrophic open border policy and limited and in many cases no vetting, we have seen an explosion of illegal migrants crossing our border since 2021. In fiscal year 2024, 516 were identified to be known or suspected terrorists, 106 of whom tried to sneak into our country between ports of entry. And these are just the ones we caught of the nearly 3 million encounters recorded by Customs and Border Protection. We've also seen an ISIS-affiliated human smuggling network bringing more than 400 migrants into the United States. And this occurs through networks associated with cartels and gangs from Sinaloa to CJ&G, who present an unacceptable risk to the security of the American people. In the midst of such threats, many have understandably lost trust in the intelligence community. One reason I'm particularly concerned about is the pattern of lapses I've seen in analytic integrity and objectivity in some of the assessments provided by the IC in the last few years. From President Trump-Russia collusion fiasco to the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic to anomalous health incidents, there have been numerous instances of the IC suppressing certain reporting, using substandard reporting to support a pre-decided thesis, and failure or refusal to consider plausible alternative analyses. That, combined with many other examples of weaponized government, results in a situation where the United States is facing very real threats, while many of our citizens lack trust in those they empower to inform on or counter these threats. Look, I've been honored to serve our country for many years now, first as an explosive ordnance disposal technician in the Army, now as a representative for the 1st District of Arkansas and chairman of this committee. In my time here, I've traveled the world and met with countless IC employees, from everyday Americans doing challenging and often dangerous work of intelligence to agencies directors like yourselves. The vast majority of those people are honest, hardworking, patriotic Americans that silently and without accolades do difficult jobs, often in austere places, sacrificing time with their families and in some cases putting themselves in danger, all in order to serve the United States. These silent warriors deserve our gratitude and our respect. They do not deserve to have their reputations besmirched by poor leadership. Unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen instances of politicized, self-serving, dishonest leaders sustaining the reputation of our institutions and patriots by abusing the powers and sacred trust given to them by the American people. We have some real work to do. You in your roles as leaders of prestigious organizations and us as members of this committee charged with conducting honest and rigorous oversight must ensure that our institutions work for the American people. Those that don't uphold the stringent standards of integrity that the American people expect and deserve must be held accountable. In the instances where trust is breached, those involved must be held accountable. This will help rebuild the trust between the American people and those that serve them in the intelligence community. Today, we need you to be candid about the threats facing the United States. I have deep concerns that many threats have been downplayed or not taken seriously enough for some time, particularly in the homeland and the Western Hemisphere. I look forward to hearing your assessment. Thank you again to our witnesses for being here today, and with that, I want to yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Himes, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning and welcome to our witnesses. As the chairman said, this hearing is an important opportunity for our committee and the American people to hear directly from the senior leadership of the intelligence community about the threats that our nation faces. I read the unclassified report, and I found a lot of continuity in the IC's assessment about critical threats to our national security compared to last year's assessment. The IC continues to see threats from our principal adversaries, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. I must say, though, that after these last 2 months, I'm worried that the call may be coming from inside the House. This report calls Russia, and I quote, an enduring potential threat to U.S. power, presence, and global interests. But as far as I can tell, we're now on Team Kremlin. We vote with them and against our allies in the United Nations. We humiliate President Zelensky in the Oval Office. The president's chief Russian negotiator, Steve Witkoff, is repeating Russian talking points and participating on a madcap signal chat about an attack on Yemen while inside Russia. USAID is gone, and with it, all American soft power. If I had time, I would ask the generals at this table about what it means to our national security to give up our soft power. We're no longer helping struggling nations in Africa. China, or worse, terrorists, are filling the vacuum. I wonder how many of those African countries will be named in next year's threat assessment. Thanks to DOJ, the men we paid to guard the most vicious ISIS terrorists in the world in Syria walked off the job. Do you think we'll see their names in this document next year? Elon Musk fired the people who maintain our nuclear weapons. Does that feel like a threat to you? Apparently, all of this mayhem is cheered by the President of the United States and by 20-somethings with laptops and nicknames like Big Balls. But I've been doing this for a long time, and I know that Moscow and Beijing and Tehran and Pyongyang cannot believe their luck. Now we come to learn that people in the most dangerous and sensitive jobs on the planet put extremely specific pre-decisional discussions about a military attack on signal, which could be intercepted by the Russians and the Chinese. Everyone here knows that the Russians or the Chinese could have gotten all of that information, and they could have passed it on to the Houthis, who easily could have repositioned weapons and altered their plans to knock down planes or sink ships. I think that it's by the awesome grace of God that we are not mourning dead pilots right now. The two general officers sitting at the table and the people who work for all of you know that if they had set up and participated in the signal chat, they would be gone. And they know that there's only one response to a mistake of this magnitude. You apologize, you own it, and you stop everything until you can figure out what went wrong and how it might not ever happen again. But that's not what happened. The Secretary of Defense responded with a brutal attack on the reporter who did not ask to be on the signal chain. Yesterday, our former colleague Mike Waltz did the same in the White House and then went on Fox to call Jeff Goldberg a loser. What do you think the people who work for you are seeing and learning from that? Now, except for that last part, almost all of the mayhem slowly eroding our safety, our standing, and our security in the world has largely happened outside the IC. If you had a part in that, and I suspect you did, I thank you. I'll say it now and I'll say it again every time we see each other over the next couple of years. You must protect the thousands of patriots who go to work every day under you to keep us safe. You need to go to work every day thinking about their morale, their well-being, and their protection. I've done intelligence oversight for more than a decade. It's my job to ask you the tough questions and maybe even make you uncomfortable. But John, I don't ever walk through your lobby and look at those 140 stars on the wall without choking up over the fact that men and women far better than I will give their lives to keep us safe. There's about a dozen people in this room who know all their stories, and you know and I know that many of the men and women who have stars on that wall died because of bad decisions or poor judgment by their leaders. We've all worked together before, and recent events notwithstanding, we need you to succeed. Your people and our safety requires you to succeed. I really hope you do. But let me say now that if some overcaffeinated 20-year-old succeeds in firing your linguists, or your mathematicians, or your paramilitary officers, if you shut down some unit because Steve Bannon or Seb Gorka doesn't like it, America will be less safe, and people will get hurt. And I and this committee and history will be very unkind. Yield back, Mr.
Gentleman yields. Now recognize Director Gabbard to make a statement on behalf of the intelligence community.
Thank you very much, Chairman Crawford and Ranking Member Himes. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity for us to be here to present the 2025 Annual Threat Assessment. I'm joined here by my colleagues from the CIA, DIA, FBI, and NSA. Our testimony today offers the collective assessment of the 18 U.S. intelligence elements making up the U.S. intelligence community and draws on the intelligence collection and information available to the IC from open source and private sector and the expertise of our analysts. It evaluates what the IC assesses most threatens our people and our nation's ability to live in a peaceful, free, secure, and prosperous society. As you know very well, we face an increasingly complex threat environment that is threatening us here at home and our interests abroad. I'll begin by focusing on what most immediately and directly threatens the United States and the well-being of the American people: the non-state criminal groups and terrorists putting American lives and livelihood at risk. I'll then move on to focus on the key nation states who have the capability to threaten our security and the interests of the United States. Cartels, gangs, and other transnational criminal organizations in our part of the world are engaging in a wide array of illicit activity, from narcotics trafficking to money laundering, to smuggling of illegal immigrants and human trafficking, which endanger the health, welfare, and safety of everyday Americans. Based on our latest reporting available for the year-long period ending October 2024, cartels were largely responsible for the deaths of more than 54,000 American citizens due to synthetic opioids. Mexico-based transnational criminal organizations are the main suppliers of illicit fentanyl to the U.S. market and are quickly adapting to enforcement and regulatory pressures by using multiple sources and methods to procure precursor chemicals and equipment, primarily from China and India, many of which are dual-use chemicals used in legitimate industries. Independent fentanyl producers are also increasingly fragmenting the drug trade in Mexico. The ready availability of precursor chemicals and ease of making illicit fentanyl have enabled independent actors to increase illicit fentanyl production and smuggling operations in Mexico. Cartels are profiting from human trafficking and have likely facilitated more than 2 million illegal immigrants encountered by law enforcement at the U.S. southwest border in 2024 alone, straining our vital resources and putting the American people at risk. Criminal groups drive much of the unrest and lawlessness in the Western Hemisphere. They also engage in extortion, weapons and human smuggling, and other illicit and dangerous revenue-seeking operations, including kidnapping for ransom, forced labor, and sex trafficking. While some of these key drivers of migrants are expected to persist, heightened U.S. border security enforcement and deportations under the Trump administration are proving to serve as a deterrent for migrants seeking to illegally cross our borders. U.S. Border Patrol apprehensions along the southwest border in January 2025 dropped 85% from the same period in 2024. Transnational Islamist extremists such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda and affiliated jihadi groups continue to pursue, enable, or inspire attacks against the United States and our citizens abroad and within the homeland to advance their ultimate objective of establishing a global Islamist caliphate. This includes heightened efforts to spread their ideology to recruit and radicalize individuals in the U.S. and the West. While the New Year's Day attacker in New Orleans had no known direct contact with ISIS terrorists, he was influenced and radicalized by ISIS ideological propaganda, as one example. Al-Qaeda and its affiliates continue to call for attacks against the United States as they conduct attacks overseas. These jihadist groups have shown their ability to adapt and evolve, including using new technology and tactics to spread their ideology and recruit new followers. A range of non-state cyber criminals are also targeting our economic interests, our critical infrastructure, and advanced commercial capability for extortion, other coercive pursuits, and financial gain. These actors are using a variety of tactics, including phishing, ransomware, and denial of service attacks to disrupt our systems and steal sensitive and lucrative information, using available technologies and taking advantage of U.S. cyber vulnerabilities. Ransomware actors last year, for example, attacked the largest payment processor for U.S. healthcare institutions, and another set of criminal actors conducted cyber attacks against U.S. water utilities. Some of these non-state cyber actors also operate as proxies for or emulate similar activities being carried out by major state actors. The IC sees China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea engaging in activities that could challenge U.S. capabilities and interests, especially related to our security and economy. They are in some cases working together in different areas to target U.S. interests and to protect themselves from U.S. sanctions. At this point, the IC assesses that China is our most capable strategic competitor. Under the leadership of Xi Jinping, the People's Republic of China seeks to position itself as a leading power in the world stage, economically, technologically, and militarily. Beijing is driven in part by a belief that Washington is pursuing a broad effort to contain China's rise and undermine CCP rule. China's most serious domestic challenge is probably China's slowing economy and the potential instability that could occur if socioeconomic grievances lead to large-scale unrest. Growing economic tensions with the United States and other countries could also weigh on China's plans for economic growth and domestic job creation. China's military is fielding advanced capabilities, including hypersonic weapons, stealth aircraft, advanced submarines, stronger space and cyber warfare assets, and a larger arsenal of nuclear weapons. While it appears they would like to develop and maintain positive ties with the United States and the Trump administration to advance its own interests and avoid conflict, China is building its military capability in part to gain an advantage in the event of a military conflict with the United States around the issue of China's efforts towards unification with the Republic of China or Taiwan. Beijing is advancing its cyber capabilities for sophisticated operations aimed at stealing sensitive U.S. government and private sector information and pre-positioning additional asymmetric attack options that may be deployed in a conflict. China's cyber activities have been linked to multiple high-profile breaches, including last year's massive compromise of U.S. telecom infrastructure, commonly referred to as Salt Typhoon. Beijing currently dominates global markets and strategically important supply chains, for example, with the mining and processing of several critical minerals. In December, China imposed an export ban to the United States on gallium, germanium, and antimony, all of which are important to the production of semiconductors and our defense technologies. This was in direct response to U.S. export controls on chips designed to broadly limit PRC access to advanced chips and chip-making equipment. China also aims to compete in other critical global industries, including AI, legacy semiconductor chip production, biomanufacturing and genetic sequencing, and medical and pharmaceutical supply production. Russia's nuclear and conventional military capabilities, along with its demonstrated economic and military resilience, make it a formidable competitor. Moscow has more nuclear weapons than any other nation that could inflict catastrophic damage on the United States and the world in the event of a major war that Russian leaders feared put them and their regime at serious risk. In late 2024, Russia announced updates to its public nuclear doctrine, expanding the conditions under which Russia would consider using nuclear weapons. Russia is building a more modern and survivable nuclear force designed to circumvent U.S. missile defense through reliable retaliatory strike potential. It intends to deter the U.S. by holding the U.S. homeland at risk and by having the capabilities to threaten nuclear war in a conflict. Russia's developed advanced cyber capabilities and has attempted to pre-position access to U.S. critical infrastructure for asymmetric options and make it a persistent cyber threat. Russia's cyber activities have been linked to multiple high-profile breaches, including the 2023 hack of Microsoft. Russia is also fielding new capabilities in anti-satellite weapons meant to degrade U.S. and allied space infrastructure. Among Russia's most concerning developments is a new satellite intended to carry a nuclear weapon as an anti-satellite weapon, violating long-standing international law against such activity and putting the U.S. and global economy at risk. Iran continues to seek to expand its influence in the Middle East, despite the degradation to its proxies and defenses during the Gaza conflict. Iran has developed and maintains ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and UAVs, including systems capable of striking U.S. targets and allies in the region. They've shown a willingness to use these weapons, including during a 2020 attack on U.S. forces in Iraq and in attacks against Israel in April and October 2024. Iran's cyber operations and capabilities also present a serious threat to U.S. networks and data. The IC continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon, and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. We continue to monitor closely if Tehran decides to reauthorize its nuclear weapons program. In the past year, we've seen an erosion of a decades-long taboo in Iran on discussing nuclear weapons in public, likely emboldening nuclear weapons advocates within Iran's decision-making apparatus. Iran's enriched uranium stockpile is at its highest levels and is unprecedented for a state without nuclear weapons. Iran will likely continue efforts to counter Israel and press for a U.S. military withdrawal from the region by aiding, arming, and helping to reconstitute its loose consortium of like-minded terrorist actors, which it refers to as its axis of resistance. Although weakened, this collection of actors still presents a wide range of threats, including to Israel's population, U.S. forces deployed in Iraq and Syria, as well as U.S. and international military and commercial shipping and transit. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is pursuing stronger strategic and conventional capabilities that can target U.S. forces and allies in the region, as well as the U.S. homeland, to bolster North Korea's leverage and stature, defend its regime, and achieve at least tacit recognition as a nuclear weapons power. Kim's recently cemented strategic partnership with Russia supports these goals by providing him with greater financial, military, and diplomatic support, reducing its reliance on China, and providing North Korean forces and weapons systems with warfighting experience. Kim views his strategic weapons advances, its deepening ties with Russia, and its economic durability as strengthening his negotiating position against Washington's demands for denuclearization and lessening Kim's need for sanctions relief. Since 2022, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have grown closer. Removing the accelerant of the war in Ukraine is unlikely to revert these bilateral relationships to a pre-war 2021 baseline, leaving room for new strategic priorities and world events to create new incentives or challenges to their expanded cooperation. Russia has been a catalyst for much of this expansion, driven heavily by the support it has needed for its war against Ukraine, including protection from U.S. and Western sanctions. In addition to exchange of military and other resource capabilities with North Korea, Russia has relied more heavily on China's financial and defense industry backing and has increased combined military exercises with China. With Iran, Russia has also expanded financial ties to mitigate sanctions. Iran has become a critical military supplier to Russia, especially of UAVs, in exchange for Russian technical support for Iranian weapons, intelligence, and advanced cyber capabilities. The threats that we see to the U.S. to U.S. national security are both complex and multifaceted. In closing, I want to address briefly the signal chat issue that I know many of you are concerned about. The President and National Security Advisor Waltz held a press conference yesterday with a clear message. It was a mistake that a reporter was inadvertently added to a signal chat with high-level national security principals having a policy discussion about imminent strikes against the Houthis and the effects of the strike. The National Security Advisor has taken full responsibility for this, and the National Security Council is conducting an in-depth review along with technical experts working to determine how this reporter was inadvertently added to this chat. The conversation was candid and sensitive, but as the President National Security Advisor stated, no classified information was shared. There were no sources, methods, locations, or war plans that were shared. This was a standard update to the National Security Cabinet that was provided alongside updates that were given to foreign partners in the region. The Signal Message app comes pre-installed on government devices. In December of 2024, CISA stated, quote, "We strongly urge highly targeted individuals to immediately review and apply best practices provided in the guidance to protect mobile communications, including consistent use of end-to-end encryption." And they named Signal as an app as an example of such an end-to-end encrypted messaging app. Ideally, these conversations occur in person. However, at times, fast-moving coordination of an unclassified nature is necessary where in-person conversation is not an option. I'm also aware that a lawsuit was filed yesterday on this issue. As a result of that pending litigation, I'm limited in my ability to comment further on that specific case. My Office of General Counsel will be in close contact with the Department of Justice on this matter. The most important thing to the American people and to all of us is the success of this military operation against terrorists who have been and continue to attack American service members was extremely successful, thanks to the leadership of President Trump and the actions of our brave men and women in uniform. As the heads of the American people's intelligence community, we will continue to provide the President, you in Congress, and our warfighters with timely, unbiased, relevant intelligence to keep our country secure, free, prosperous, and at peace. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Gabbard. We now turn to member questions. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. I want to talk about, before I get into the threats, I want to talk about something we've talked about in this committee and in this setting before. We've had IC agency leaders commit to complying with our document requests but not follow through. And I don't know if this is due to direction from previous administration or middle management obstruction, but I find it completely unacceptable. In fact, I had to subpoena the NSA in order to cooperate with our AHI investigation last year. As you all know, it's the charge of this committee to conduct rigorous oversight, and part of that oversight is occasionally requires us that we request documents from your organizations to enable our investigations. We cannot adequately do our jobs without your partnership and your cooperation. General Haugh and General Kruse, we had this conversation here before last year, and I'm not satisfied with your responsiveness. Therefore, I'm going to ask that question again on the record in this open setting to each of you. Do I have your unequivocal commitment to cooperating with document or other information requests from this committee, General Haugh?
You do, Chairman.
Thank you, General. Director Patel.
You do, Mr. Chairman.
Director Gabbard.
Yes, Chairman.
Director Ratcliffe.
Yes, you do, Chairman and Ranking Member. And I want to start by saying it's good to be back. It's good to see you. And as you all know, I have a special appreciation for the work that this committee does, having previously been a member. I also understand the importance of the oversight role that it has. And so you have my full commitment and my understanding about what your responsibilities are and my obligation to keep you fully and currently informed, and I will do that.
Appreciate that. General Kruse.
Chairman, of course, you have our continuing support on this critically important effort for the nation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I want to turn now to something that's a topic of conversation and really needs to be, and that's our own neighborhood here in our Western Hemisphere. I mentioned in my opening statement, I'm deeply concerned about encroachment in the Western Hemisphere, not just by China, but other adversaries like Russia and Iran, from Russian military cooperation with and support to Venezuela and Nicaragua, CCP-linked companies' acquisition of critical assets in Central and South America, Iran's defense agreement with Bolivia, the establishment of a technical military cooperation commission including Venezuela, Cuba, China, Russia, and Iran. And I could list several more alarming examples. I'm afraid we've focused so much of our attention across the world that we've lost sight of our own neighborhood. leading to the anti-American regimes gaining permanent footholds within striking distance of the homeland. So, Director Gabbard, to the extent that you can discuss it in this setting, what is the intelligence community's assessment of adversary encroachment in the Western Hemisphere?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll be able to go into greater detail in the closed session, but the intelligence community assessment reflects what you have just detailed and outlined. The continued competition, encroachment, and investments that are occurring in the Western Hemisphere have rapidly increased and continue to pose a threat both to our economic interests and to our security. Every day there are new reports of further attempts. One just recently that came up yesterday with investments that are being made in the southeast part of the United States. Again, I'll go into this further in a closed setting, but the intelligence assessments that we are receiving are being shared with senior cabinet officials, Department of Energy, Commerce, Treasury, those who are working alongside us to not only monitor, but to determine the best policies that will protect our interests.
Thank you. I want to turn to Director Patel real quick in the time that I have left. If you can flesh this out for me just a little bit. You indicated something that caught my attention in the proceeding yesterday, and that was your involvement with the Judicial Drug Task Force that you partner with at the state level, and how that has yielded positive results with regard to cartel activity. Can you put a little finer point on that to describe those partnerships in the 53 seconds we have remaining?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, thanks for having us, Ranking Member. My priorities at the FBI have been to partner with state and local law enforcement in ways that we have not done so before, particularly on information sharing, and it's a two-way street. And in order for us to effectuate drug seizures and narcotics interdictions in the 50 states, we treat them as all border states, because that's what's happening. We have an American citizen die of a drug overdose every 7 minutes. That is wildly out of control and unacceptable. But the FBI cannot do that mandate and secure the American people from Washington, D.C. So we're putting resources in the field. We are working with our partners at the state and local level, and we are seeing immediate results, as we are seeing in Arkansas, as I outlined yesterday, with hundreds of arrests, thousands of pounds of narcotics seized, dozens of weapons, and multiple indictments.
Thank you, Director. I'm going to yield and recognize Ranking Member Himes for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there's something I care as much about as the national security of the United States, it's the powers and prerogatives of this Congress and its oversight duties. So I want to spend a minute or so on yesterday's testimony in front of the Senate and direct these questions in particular to Director Patel and Director Gabbard. Yesterday, Senator Heinrich asked, did this conversation, referring to the signal chat, include information on weapons, packages, targets, or timing? Director Patel, you said not that I'm aware of. Director Gabbard, you said same answer. This morning we learned that the signal chat included the following update, forward-looking update from the Secretary of Defense. Time now, 11:44 Eastern Time. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM. We are go for mission launch. 12:15 Eastern Time. F-18 launch. First strike package. 13:45 trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also, strike drones launch. MQ-9s. 14:10 more F-18s launch. Second strike package. Do either of the directors want to reflect on their testimony yesterday in the context of what I just read?
Sure. 1, I was not on that signal chat. 2, I have not reviewed it. And 3, as you just indicated, that was made public this morning.
But, Director, you didn't, prior to yesterday's Senate, you were on the signal chat, correct?
No.
Okay, but did you review the material on the signal chat?
No, I wasn't on it.
Director Gabbard?
Yes, Ranking Member. My answer yesterday was based on my recollection, or the lack thereof, on the details that were posted there. I was not, and what was shared today reflects the fact that I was not directly involved with that part of the signal chat, and replied at the end reflecting the effects, the very brief effects that the National Security Advisor had shared.
So it's your testimony that less than 2 weeks ago, you were on a signal chat that had all of this information about F-18s and MQ-9 Reapers and targets on strike, and you in that 2-week period simply forgot that that was there. That's your testimony?
My testimony is I did not recall the exact details of what was included there.
That was not your testimony. Your testimony was that you were not aware of anything related to weapons packages, targets, and timing.
As the testimony yesterday continued on, there were further questions related to that, where I acknowledged that there was conversation about weapons, and I don't remember the exact wording that I used, but I did not recall the specific details that were included.
Director Gabbard, you've reasserted that there was no classified information. I think we can all agree that that information shouldn't have been out there. But let me ask you this. Are you familiar with the ODNI's classification guidance?
I'm familiar
I've
with
actually
it.
got a copy right here. If I read you a part of that guidance, I wonder if you could tell me what the level of classification indicated is. I'm reading from your classification guidance. And the criteria is information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing an attack. Do you recall what your own guidance would suggest that be classified?
I don't have the specifics in front of me, but it would point to what was shared would fall under the DoD's classification system and the Secretary of Defense's authority.
So let me help you, because
determine
there's a
what is
very clear
classified
answer.
and what is not.
You don't, I guess you don't have it, but information providing, this is the ODNI guidance, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing an attack should be classified as top secret. Do you disagree with that?
I don't disagree with that. I just point out that the DoD classification guidance is separate from the ODNI's classification guidance.
Do you think it would be
and
materially different?
Ultimately, the Secretary of Defense holds the authority to classify or declassify.
Do you think it's likely that DoD guidance is materially different from what I just read?
I haven't reviewed the DoD guidance, so I can't comment.
Director Gabbard, a lot of this suggests sort of a lack of sobriety. When there's punch emojis and fire emojis, it's a lack of sobriety. I don't mean that literally. But I have one last question for you, because I think people really listen to what you have to say. You, on March 15th, as DNI, retweeted a post from Ian Miles Chong, who is listed on RT, that's Russia Today's website, as, quote, a political and cultural commentator who has contributed content to RT since at least 2022. Director Gabbard, do you think that it's responsible for you as head of the intelligence community and the principal presidential intelligence advisor to retweet posts from individuals affiliated with Russian state media?
That retweet came from my personal account, and I would have to go back to look at the substance of the tweet.
Can I, just so that we don't have a lack of confusion amongst our allies and enemies and us, can I act perhaps that you not think that you should be saying one thing on your personal account than you say officially?
I maintain my First Amendment rights to be able to express my own personal views on different issues.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields now recognize the distinguished Vice Chairman, General Kelly.
Yeah, I'd now, for the first 30 seconds, Mr. Ratcliffe, or Director Ratcliffe, formerly known as Texas, from this Mississippi guy, I'd like to give you 30 seconds if you have anything to respond to what Ms. Gabbard Director Gabbard, I'm sorry, just said.
Well, Mississippi, it's good to see you again, and I appreciate the opportunity. You know, there's so much talk about this Atlantic article and about things that were said and that could have happened instead of a focus on what did happen. So my responsibility as CIA director, one of its responsibilities is to kill terrorists. And that's exactly what I did along with President Trump's excellent national security team. That's what we should be focused on. With regard to that article, I also would appreciate the opportunity to relay the fact that yesterday I spent 4 hours answering questions from senators as a result of that article that were intimating that I transmitted classified information because there were hidden messages. Those messages were revealed today and revealed that I did not transmit classified information. and that the reporter, who I don't know, I think intentionally intended it to indicate that. That reporter also indicated that I had released the name of an undercover CIA operative in that signal chain. In fact, I had released the name of my chief of staff, who is not operating undercover. That was deliberately false and misleading, and I appreciate the opportunity to reflect that my answers haven't changed. I used an appropriate channel to communicate sensitive information. It was permissible to do so. I didn't transfer any classified information. And at the end of the day, what is most important is that the mission was a remarkable success, is what everyone should be focused on here, because that's what did happen, not what possibly could have happened.
Thank you, Director Ratcliffe. Director Patel, thank you for the great job that you've done. So, first of all, your coordination and trying to comply with the letter that was sent last year and the year before asking for the baseball shooting, of which what I got was basically what happened on the field, and I was there, so I don't need to know that, although no one from the FBI ever talked to me about what happened. They talked to people who were not there. But I appreciate your commitment to getting us the full unredacted report, or the redactions are to protect innocent people who are not part of the process, not the people who made decisions to classify that as suicide by cop as opposed to an assassination attempt of many members of Congress, of which I was one. Thank you for your commitment, Director Patel, because I know that you will give us what we have asked for so that we can put this to rest, Mr. Winstrup, myself, and several others. Can I get your commitment to do that, Director Patel?
In fact, I just got an update, Mr. Vice Chairman, from my team. You'll have all of those materials to you and your committee by the close of business today, or at the latest tomorrow morning.
And just really quickly, Director Ratcliffe, and I don't want to go over time. I think it's so important for everybody to have their time. Can you tell me the impact that DOJ has had in causing you to fire people you shouldn't have fired, or release people who are instruments of national security no longer there? Tell me if you've had any impact specifically that DOJ has caused you to lose someone who was necessary for national security.
Given the fact that as of this date, no one from DOJ has been on the CIA campus, and I've had no direct communication with DOJ other than conversations with Elon Musk at cabinet meetings, I would say the impact is zero.
Director Patel?
I'm in a similar situation. We do work with DOJ on government efficiencies, but I have not seen any negative impacts at the FBI.
Thank you very much. And Director Gabbard, it's good to see you again, too. You know, I think we were freshmen together, you and I and Director Ratcliffe, and I'm here and you guys are like there. Have you seen any impact across the whole IC that DOJ has caused things that you can't respond to?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. It's great to see you all again here. The answer is no. Similar with Director Ratcliffe, DOJ has not been at ODNI. The President understands the essential national security mission that we have, and we are going through our own internal assessments to ensure we're achieving the effects in an efficient way that is responsible to the American taxpayer.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Chairman, to the witnesses, many of whom I've worked with in the past. It appears that this year's report omitted any discussion of transnational concerns like global health security, infectious diseases, and the role of conflict, violence, and political instability play as drivers of migration. Coupled with the administration's cuts to USAID and other international assistance, particularly health and humanitarian assistance, won't these reductions and eliminations increase regional instability and volatility in areas already at high risk for threats? Was the IC consulted at all in the decisions to eliminate such critical funding, and why weren't these risks included in this year's report?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. The direction that I gave to our National Intelligence Council as they were putting together the annual threat assessment was to focus on the most direct and extreme threats that we face from non-state and state actors. While I acknowledge the factors that you've mentioned, create an environment that our operators and intelligence officials need to be aware of. This year's annual threat assessment was really more targeted to focus on the direct threats that we have the ability to affect and impact. Some of those were included here that you mentioned with regard to the effects and impacts of USAID. That assessment has not yet been done, or at least to my knowledge, and was not considered to be included here.
Director Patel, this year's assessment, sir, confirms a threat I've worked on for a number of years, domestic extremists, including lone wolves, white nationalists motivated by racial or anti-government grievances, even religious grievances. Mr. Director, a few yes or no questions. Do you, sir, agree that these domestic threats must be addressed as thoroughly as foreign extremists?
All threats like that will be treated equally, yes, sir.
Is it true, sir, you moved personnel out of the FBI section responsible for countering domestic violent extremists?
I don't believe I did that.
Is it true, sir, that you've discussed disbanding this section?
I don't believe I've done that.
Will you pledge today, sir, not to disband this critical section?
I will pledge to you today that any personnel matters that are being worked on currently, once finalized, the congressional notification will be published to your committee.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, the former federal prosecutor, Mr. LaHood.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses today for your service to our country. And I want to focus my questions this morning on FISA Section 702. And Director Ratcliffe, welcome back to the committee. In your confirmation hearing before the Senate, you were asked extensively about FISA and Section 702, and I think laid out a compelling narrative on how, as you described it, quote, how indispensable it is to national security. And you were also asked about a warrant requirement on Section 702. And your answer to that was, quote, on whether a warrant makes sense on 702, your quote was, the answer is no. We're talking about national security issues where sometimes minutes matter in the ability to disrupt or interdict the bad actors or to act upon the intelligence that you can gain from that, unquote. Director, I wanted to ask you, is that still your belief today regarding the warrant requirement?
Congressman, it absolutely is. You've accurately reflected my prior testimony. It is also my testimony that 702 is indispensable to our intelligence picture, and the loss of it would be catastrophic to CIA. And the reason that I say that from this position is not only is 50% of all of our critical analysis provided to the President as Commander-in-Chief in the President's daily brief 702 derived, 70% of CIA's success with regard to advanced weapons counterproliferation is the result of 702 collected information. And finally, 90% of CIA's successful interdictions with regard to synthetic drugs like fentanyl are the result of 702 collection. It's absolutely indispensable to the work that CIA does, and I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to reflect that to this committee.
Thank you, Director. And just to ask a follow-up on that, as you know, in the House last year when we had our FISA reform and Section 702 reform measures put in place, you know, we had a debate, robust debate on the House floor regarding the warrant requirement. It was a very, very close vote, 212 to 212. Director Ratcliffe, what can you tell our members to alleviate and reassure them on, again, the harm that a warrant requirement would do to 702?
Well, Congressman, it would impose a de facto ban on lawfully querying previously collected data to find threats against U.S. persons and government officials. So that would be, again, catastrophic to our efforts to keep our community safe. And I would also point out, because I know that these are legitimate concerns with regard when we talk about FISA and 702 specifically, everyone on this committee recalls that when I was a member, I also called out FISA abuses when they occurred. And I don't want there to be any violation of Americans' civil liberties and Fourth Amendment rights, but I would point to the CIA's frankly impeccable record of compliance, and we can talk about that more in a closed session.
Thank you, Director. Director Patel, I want to turn to you. Similar in your Senate confirmation, you were asked extensively about 702. And as you know, in our bill that we passed last year, we put lots of reforms and changes and protocols in place for the FBI. And I know that you're supportive of many of those. Specifically on the impracticalities of a warrant requirement on 702, you were quoted as saying, when you were asked about it, it is almost impossible to make that function of the warrant requirement work and to serve the national no-fail mission. Is that still your testimony here today?
It's great to see you, Congressman, and yes, that's my testimony.
Thank you. As you know, the reforms that we put in place were significant, requiring the FBI personnel to get a supervisor or attorney approval to conduct U.S. person inquiries, requiring high-level approvals up to the FBI deputy director level before certain queries are conducted on U.S. elected or appointed officials, candidates, or media personnel, requiring the Department of Justice to audit all U.S. person queries performed by the FBI within 6 months of each, of 6 months of each query, reducing the number of FBI personnel who have the ability to query. Can you talk about the current implementation of those reforms and how that's going, Director Patel?
Absolutely. With probably the most recent one, in terms of 702 query reviews, we only have about 200 left when it comes to U.S. persons, and we will promulgate those findings to you. But as of today, of all the U.S. persons queried in the 702 databases, there's only been one instance of negligent conduct. We have already implemented limited access to those who actually know how to use the FISA process in 702, and we have implemented a direct reporting structure to the Office of Director and the Deputy Director to make sure that anyone, whether it's intentional or unintentional, abuses the 702 query system is brought to our attention immediately, and we will take that on for action directly. And in terms of piggybacking off Director Ratcliffe's, the public defender in me realizes the importance of constitutional due process more than anyone. The staffer in me from the House Intelligence Committee may be the only person who has worked more on FISA reform and exposing FISA abuse in modern congressional history. And the terrorism prosecutor in me and the JSOC civilian in me tells me that we cannot do away with 702 or FISA Title I and Title III, but we can work with you and your committee to make it better. I don't know all those ideas. I don't have all those answers, but you have my commitment that we will use it appropriately going forward.
Thank you, Director. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Tulsi, you and I came into the Congress together in 2013. And Kash, you and I was serving on the Intelligence Committee when you worked on the Intelligence Committee. And John, you and I are both from Texas, and we both served together on the Intelligence Committee. The idea that this information, if it was presented to our committee, would not be classified, y'all know is a lie. That's ridiculous. I've seen things much less sensitive be presented to us with high classification. And to say that it isn't is a lie to the country. I want to ask the generals now. The NSA is principally in charge of intercepting things like signals intelligence from other countries. General, I want to ask you, if your organization, your agency, intercepted something like this from Russia or China or some other country, would you consider this classified information?
Representative, we would be classifying based off of our sources and methods. So those would be the things that, in terms of how we process, how we would be able to obtain the information and how we'd report it,
Sure.
we would classify based off of our source and method.
So if you knew that the Secretary of Defense and the National Security Advisor of Russia or China and the head of the Foreign Ministry and all of the folks who were associated with that signal chain, if you intercepted that information, General, would you consider it classified?
So it would be classified based off of our collection.
So the NSA would classify it, would
Based off
determine it
of
as classified.
the protection of our own source and method, not necessarily based off the content, but how we collected that information.
But it would be classified.
Well, we certainly wouldn't be collecting on a U.S. person conversation.
No, I understand. I'm
We're
saying if you did your job and collected it from the Russian Foreign Ministry and the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of Defense and the President's Chief Advisor, there is no way, having sat on this committee for 9 years, that somebody would come in with that information and give us something that says, unclassified, you can walk out of this room with this information and give it to whomever you want. You know, with all respect, you and I worked on the committee at the same time. Tulsi, you and I came in together. I've never had an issue of beef with you. John, you and I are both from Texas. Y'all know that's a lie. It's a lie to the country. I want to ask about the Alien Enemies Act really quick while I have time. The President has used the Alien Enemies Act, a wartime authority last used to detain German and Japanese nationals during World War II, to summarily deport people accused of being members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Agua. To invoke this law, the President must demonstrate that the United States is under invasion by a foreign nation or government. They have alleged that we are under invasion by the Venezuelan government. The idea that we are at war with Venezuela would come as a surprise to most Americans. The unclassified version of the annual threat assessment the intelligence community just released makes no mention of any invasion or war that we are fighting with the nation of Venezuela. You would think our nation being at war would merit at least a small reference in this threat assessment. And Director Ratcliffe, does the intelligence community assess that we are currently at war or being invaded by the nation of Venezuela?
We have no assessment that says that.
Thank you. In invoking the law, the President alleged that Tren de Agua is, quote, undertaking hostile actions against the U.S. at the direction, clandestine or otherwise, of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Director Gabbard, does the intelligence community assess that the Venezuelan government is directing Tren de Agua's hostile actions against the United States?
There are varied assessments that came from different intelligence community elements. I'll defer to Director Patel to speak specifically to the FBI assessment.
But let me ask you, so you're saying there are conflicting assessments that have come from the IC?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll take it up in closed session. All right. You know, your threat assessment makes issue of, highlights fentanyl trafficking as a top threat to the United States, yet support for law enforcement cooperation with Mexico has been put on hold, and there's been a threat of invasion to Mexico by the United States. You assess that Russia's advanced cyber capabilities make it a persistent counterintelligence cyber threat, yet the administration shut down the unit at the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency tasked with stopping Russian cyber attacks. There are so many other ways that the actions of this administration have contradicted this threat assessment, and the administration is making the world and the United States more dangerous. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here. I look forward to working with each and every one of you to keep our country and our planet safe. I wanted to carry on the topic of Section 702 reauthorization. Representative LaHood and I did a lot of work on this over the past 2 years. As you all know, last Congress, this committee worked in a bipartisan manner to advance the reauthorization of what most of us, if not all, deem to be our country's single and most important national security tool. The result was what was titled the Reforming Intelligence and Securing America Act, which not only reauthorized Section 702, but equally important, it provided necessary reforms to our intelligence community in an effort to address past abuses. This was the largest single reform of the FBI and the IC in a generation, making sure that there are appropriate compliance guardrails that enhance accountability while still protecting the critical tools necessary for our nation's security. Just to name a few, in 2009, Section 702 protected our nation from an attack by an al-Qaeda member who intended to detonate explosives in the Manhattan subway lines. In 2014, Section 702 helped prevent attacks by assisting in the removal of ISIS leader Haugh. In 2022, Section 702 contributed to the U.S. government's operation against the last remaining 9/11 architect, Ayman al-Zawahiri. And as we saw in the horrendous attacks of October 7th, an attack on the people of Israel, where Hamas killed over 1,200 innocent civilians, intelligence collection is essential to the safety and security of our population. We must never, ever see another attack the likes of 9/11, especially as a result of a self-inflicted intelligence failure. Not reauthorizing the use of this authority in this coming year would intentionally and willingly put the United States at a disadvantage against actors who seek our destruction. Representative LaHood touched on the warrant requirement. As you all know, that is really the linchpin here. And I think it's abundantly clear for members of this committee, members of this Congress, and for members of our Intelligence Committee to understand that a warrant requirement is on the collection of data. A warrant requirement cannot apply to the querying of already lawfully collected data. To follow that theory to its logical extreme would be to say that a police department who has an evidence locker containing lawfully collected data has to get a warrant to re-enter that evidence locker. It'd be akin to say to a police officer they cannot run a license plate, which is querying off of lawfully collected Department of Transportation data without getting a warrant. It would shut down the courts, it would shut down law enforcement, it would make our country much less safe. So I want to ask Director Patel, Director Ratcliffe, I want to yield the floor to you as we will be working with all of you, particularly your two agencies, on reauthorization, to share your thoughts.
So it's great to see you, sir, and thanks for the question. Look, on 702, just to flesh out some of the more specific operational use that I have, it which specifically relates to what you just said. When I was a terrorism prosecutor, we used 702 directly to prevent the shopping mall in Houston from being blown up. We used 702 collection directly to prevent an attack on the state capitol in the state of California. And those individuals were prosecuted and are currently in prison. And balancing that awesome responsibility with the constitutional protections that every American should have when we're talking about U.S. persons specifically is something that I keep in mind on every single decision surrounding 702. But as Director Ratcliffe stated, and has been my experience, while I understand and appreciate the concerns for the warrant requirement based on U.S. persons, if there is a solution that allows that to happen in real time, then we can have that discussion. But I have not encountered one, and thus it obviates the need in my perspective, in my mission set, to protect the American people and hunt down criminals in its application. So where it is now with the reforms you all have implemented, we've done a great job on protecting American civil liberties, and I'm always open to, and I do believe we can do some more.
Director Ratcliffe?
Good to see you again, Congressman. I agree with Director Patel's comments with regard to that. I'll start out by saying, obviously in this role, I'm not a policymaker. But at the appropriate time, when this comes up for renewal, I think I've made it clear and will make it clear from the CIA's perspective the indispensability of 702 as a tool to providing the Commander-in-Chief an accurate picture of the threat environment. You mentioned some examples of 702 success. When we get into the classified session, later this afternoon, I have some further examples of 702 success that we can talk about, and I think that reflects my position.
Thank you all. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming. Thank you for your service. Director Gabbard, you said no classified information was included in the signal chat, correct?
That's correct.
And President Trump also said there was no classified information in the signal chat. And Secretary Hegseth said nobody was texting war plans. There was absolutely no classified info in that chat. Lieutenant General Kruse, I'd like to talk to you about a couple things real quick. Executive Order 13526, Section 1.4a. This is the Trump administration's executive order with regard to classified information. It says, information shall be classified if its unauthorized disclosure could reasonably be expected to cause damage to national security, including military plans, weapons systems, or operations. You don't disagree that that's accurately quoted, right?
That's an accurate quote from the executive order.
And DOD 5200.01, this is the DOD's manual on classification, says, quote, information shall be classified if its unauthorized disclosure could reasonably be expected to cause describable damage to national security. This includes military plans, weapon systems, or operations. You don't disagree that I quoted that accurately, right?
That's also an accurate quote.
Can I show you I'd like to show you the text that Secretary Hegseth actually published to the world. Now, Lieutenant General Kruse, as Ranking Member Himes said, it says, time now, weather is favorable, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. Then it says at 12:15 Eastern, F-18s launch first strike package. F-18s are military systems, correct? Weapon systems.
They are.
Okay. 13:45, trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also, strike drones launch, MQ-9s. MQ-9s is a weapon system, correct?
They are.
Okay. I think applying the executive order as well as the DoD manual to this fact pattern, we clearly have weapon systems that have been identified. That is classified information. Now, the reason why it's important that this information not be disclosed is that we don't want the adversaries to know what's about to happen, right, sir?
Well, I would draw a small distinction there. You referenced and asked if that platform, those two platforms are weapon systems. They are, but those terms are used all across the globe in a lot of contexts. So it's really about how they're used in the context of this particular document. I just want to clarify that the use of those terms,
I understand.
Yeah.
In this situation, those are operational details.
They are operational details, but again, as you quoted the DoD instruction, it's about operations. So as you further go down into what are the operational details, I think as we had a discussion yesterday, the important aspect, I think all of us are very familiar.
This is classified information. This is classified information. It's a weapon system as well as sequence of strikes as well as details about the operations. And so I think that just piggybacking off of what some other members have said, using the DoD's manual as well as the executive order in operation today with the Trump administration, this text message is clearly classified information. Secretary Hegseth has disclosed military plans as well as classified information. He needs to resign immediately. He needs to resign immediately, and a full investigation needs to be undertaken with regard to whether other similar signal chats are occurring in this administration. I'd like to turn my attention to another topic. Director Patel, according to the DOJ, in 2022, the FBI led Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, in my hometown of Chicago, valiantly led efforts to prevent a plot to attack Naval Station Great Lakes in Illinois. You don't dispute that, do you, sir?
I'm not familiar with it, but I don't dispute what you're telling me.
Thank you. A memo obtained by ABC 7 News of Chicago said that this task force will now be, quote, actively supporting, close quote, the Department of Homeland Security and its immigration enforcement. You don't dispute that either, do you?
I'm just not familiar with it, sir.
Okay. Sir, I just have to say, the DOJ has now tasked JTTFs to shift some resources to immigration enforcement efforts. And I don't say this lightly, if there's a terrorist attack anywhere in the country, including in Chicago, and it was because the JTTFs in part shifted resources, they'll be held to pay. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Gabbard, was the target terrorist named in the text, or was it simply referred to as target terrorist?
The target was not named.
Thank you. Was the location named?
Congressman, no locations were named.
Thank you. Director Patel, there was a specific accusation made about how close we are working with Mexico currently. My understanding, and I want to congratulate you on this, and I think it shows a shift of focus at the FBI since you've taken over to what it should have been doing all along, which is chasing the 10 most wanted that are threatening our country. My understanding is that 2 of the 3 were actually arrested in Mexico and are being extradited back to the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We have been working. One of the first meetings I took as FBI director was my counterpart, Secretary Farouche in Mexico. And subsequent to that, we have repaid or extradited or expelled from Mexico 2 top 10 of the FBI's most wanted list and 33 other criminals.
Well, it sounds to me like we're working closer with them today than we have in the last several years, and that the focus of the FBI has shifted to actually protecting American citizens instead of arresting pro-life protesters.
Our mission is to find violent criminals wherever they are, and if they're in Mexico, we're going to get them.
Thank you. And I appreciate you, and I appreciate the change in the focus of the FBI. I want to talk with you a little bit about the counterintelligence threats, one of which was an active duty U.S. Army soldier charged with conspiring to transmit national defense information to individuals located in China. What can you say in this setting, or can you briefly explain your work with interagency partners to identify and neutralize intelligence threats in the United States around this example?
For me, sir?
Yes, sir.
So generally speaking, on counterintelligence and countering espionage, whether it's from adversaries like the CCP, Russia, Iran, or otherwise, we have prioritized them as an equally violent criminal enterprise seeking to do harm to our critical infrastructure and also to exploit and steal our data, whether it's government or private personnel. And so we have expanded our resources into them and working with the interagency to make it a priority.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to the issue of the threshold of parole under the previous administration and the number of illegal immigrants that have come into this country, including people with known membership in terrorist groups. For those individuals that pose a risk and that we have captured and are being deported, are we sharing the biometric and biographic information with our allies to mitigate their ability to relocate or operate abroad?
What we are doing at the FBI is sharing the information we're allowed to with our Five Eye partners, and then on an individual basis, we are trying to share information with other partners who deemed individuals that they find of consequence.
Okay. As you move further into your position, if you have additional recommendations on how we better share information, please let us know.
Yes, sir.
Director Ratcliffe, China's influence on the Panama Canal has increased since 2017. Panama became the first Latin American country to sign on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Can you talk about not just China embedding itself into the various canal-related sectors and operations, but what other areas in Central and South America have China and others increased their presence, and what examples concern you the most?
Thanks, Congressman. Appreciate the question. I do want to comment. The question before about cooperation with Mexico, it's really across the IC. When Mexico's Secretary General Omar Harfuch, head of Mexican security, was here, he not only met with Director Patel, he met with Director Gabbard, and he met with me. So we have been working on that, again, to the benefit of both our countries. To your point, the PRC throughout Central and South America continues to attempt to use its soft power to gain a foothold. They use direct aid to countries that need it. They also provide funding to universities to get a foothold to create influence. And you mentioned the Panama Canal, and you've seen the diplomatic efforts of the administration to address that and push back on PRC ownership of the canal locks. But that ties into what the IC is doing. In these instances, it's important for us, Congressman, to the best way we can operate is to provide intelligence to countries in Central and South America, to provide them with briefings, which we do, to provide them with tailored analysis of our intelligence about how China is manipulating them, about how China is hacking them, the things that China is doing to gain a foothold, and Russia and Iran throughout that area. So the CIA is very much focused on that.
Gentleman's time's expired. Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Chairman. General Haugh, the NSA recently warned its employees not to use the Signal app. Is that correct?
What we did, Congressman, is we put out cybersecurity advisories on a whole host of systems.
On the Signal app that was included in that advisory, right?
What we've done is we've put out an advisory on how to use the Signal app. encrypted applications because we do encourage our employees and their families to use encrypted.
Because there's risk to that app.
There are.
Okay. General Kruse, DOD also issued a warning about vulnerabilities to the Signal app recently, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Director Gabbard, you were on this Signal text chain in question, correct?
Yes.
As was Mr. Witkoff, the administration's lead negotiator with the Russians, correct?
Yes.
And at the time, Mr. Witkoff was actually in Russia during this chat discussion, was he not?
I was not aware of that.
Was he on his personal phone at the time?
I don't know.
Well, it's my understanding that he was indeed in Russia. Director Gabbard, you were also traveling during this discussion, correct?
Yes.
And where were you?
I was traveling through the Asia-Pacific region. I don't recall which country I was in at that time.
You don't remember the country?
I'd have to go back and look at the schedule.
Director Gabbard, I want to direct your attention again to the text chain where it says, just confirmed with CENTCOM, we are a go for mission launch. Does that indicate to you that there is about to be a military operation?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, earlier in this hearing, we heard about the DOD's classification standards. I want to now turn my attention to your classification standards. You're the Director of National Intelligence. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence classification guide says, quote, information providing indication or advance warning that the U.S. or its allies are preparing for an attack, end quote, is to be classified as top secret. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Director Gabbard, have the Houthis indicated an ability to shoot down American aircraft?
Yes.
They have in fact done so, haven't they?
Yes.
Including MQ-9 Reapers, haven't they?
That's correct.
And that was one of the systems used in the attack recently that's the subject of this discussion, is it not?
Correct.
General Kruse, are you familiar with this system?
I'm not wearing my glasses at the moment, but...
Well, I'll help you out. This is an SA-3 anti-aircraft system.
Correct.
Are you familiar with this next system?
I am.
What is it?
I'm going to have to ask you.
It's an SA-6.
I'm going to guess that
this is also an advanced anti-aircraft system, is it not?
It is. It was used widely in the Balkans in the 90s, correct?
And the Houthis also have this system, don't they?
They certainly do.
And they've employed it against our aircraft, have they not?
They have attempted to, correct.
I spent my life in service to this country. I deployed 3 times to combat in service to this nation. I learned in that time in service that responsibility is core to leadership. You accept responsibility when things go wrong. You admit mistakes. You set the standard from the very top. It is completely outrageous to me that the administration officials come before us today with impunity, no acceptance of responsibility, excuse after excuse after excuse, while we send our men and women downrange to do incredibly difficult, incredibly dangerous things on our behalf. And yet, nobody is willing to come to us and say this was wrong. This was a breach of security and we won't do it again. It is outrageous and it is a leadership failure, and that's why Secretary Hegseth, who undoubtedly transmitted classified, sensitive operational information via this chain, must resign immediately. There can be no fixes, there can be no corrections until there is accountability, and I'm calling on the administration to move forward with accountability. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. Good to see many of you again, and thank you for enduring 2 long days. I will note I always use fire emojis when I see terrorists getting killed. And I want to talk about cartels. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I've been investigating it thoroughly for the last couple of years, And I'm glad to see that it's mentioned in all of your opening statements. I mentioned it at the very beginning of the threat assessment. There's a lot to work on here. One of our task force, we had a cartel task force in Congress. One of our key findings was that there needs to be a centralized, maybe call it authority or maybe call it office, maybe call it cartel czar within the administration that actually coordinates all the very different aspects of fighting this battle. Has anything like that been talked about? I'll go to you, Director Gabbard.
Thank you, Congressman. It's good to see you again. This is very much central to the conversations in planning and execution of the President's focus on targeting the cartels and the threats that they pose to the American people. Homeland security task forces are being set up that include across the government integration. I can speak from my standpoint from the intelligence community, and our National Counterterrorism Center is leaning heavily forward into gathering and consolidating and integrating the intelligence that comes from DEA and others who've been working this issue for a while to make it so that it can be shared and integrated through the federal, state, and local law enforcement equities who are going after this problem.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot more about that exact thing in closed session, but at a higher level, our recommendation is there needs to be someone at a much higher level that coordinates state, DOD, CIA, FBI, Homeland. It's a massive problem, one I'm all too familiar with. Director Patel, the FBI is tasked with working foreign corruption charges. In the past administration, the FBI told me they actually don't focus on Mexico very much. Because now, in their defense, they say the reason is because they won't get anything out of it, because they don't have a cooperative government to work with. I think a lot has changed. Do I have your commitment that we will at least start following up on those, because the judiciary system in Mexico is a key component in our failures to address the cartels?
You do, Congressman. Apologies for not getting back to you sooner.
You're good. I appreciate it. I also want to ask you that the FBI has disrupted an alarming number of terrorist attacks in the last 2 years. Great on the FBI for doing that. I don't think many Americans realize how good the FBI has been at this. But this also gets to the conversation earlier about FISA 702. One of the main arguments I wanted to argue with my colleagues on this was when you have a warrant process for the query, what you will fail to do is connect the dots between the domestic and the international threat, and those connections are there, as we see all the time. Would you agree with that? That we need to maintain that process in a responsible way, of course.
I do, sir.
I appreciate that. Director Gabbard, in my remaining time, I want to ask you, because of my, and this may go to our General Kruse as well. Because of my work on energy and commerce, we have an issue there with broadband spectrum auctions, and of course this affects our intelligence community in a very large way, and our DoD. Getting right to the question here, how much, if any, spectrum can the DoD give up without having a significant effect on the administration's prioritization of lethality and deterrence?
I'll defer to General Kruse, specific to DOD.
I certainly wouldn't want to speak for all of DOD, and I think the committee is already in a fantastic conversation with the DOD on that issue. But broadly, what I would say is DOD has laid out the portions of the spectrum that it believes for both operational capabilities, and in closed session, I am more than happy to walk you through from the intelligence portion of the mission that we do. There are two different portions of the spectrum. We often talk about one, but not the other, and in closed session, I'd be more than happy to tell you why the other portion of the spectrum is important to national security.
Sure, and the details are obviously classified, but we can talk about X and S spectrums and get a better idea for the public about, because the public would benefit from telecom having the ability to use some of these. When we look at 5G networks, 6G networks, so it's a conversation that we need to have and a much longer time to do so, which I've run out of. So I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Dr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I associate myself with the comments of my colleague, Congressman Crow. I'm deeply disappointed in how we're handling this breach of protocol and so forth. You know, every year at the beginning of Congress, we take an oath to office. You know, this is an awesome responsibility to be a member of Congress, to to protect our country. We have no greater responsibility than to protect our homeland. And, you know, when I walk into this committee and the honor of being on this committee, I don't see Democrats and Republicans. I see folks that every day want to do the same thing. But as Congressman Crow suggested, the mark of leadership, and we all are leaders in this room, is to accept responsibility when mistakes happen. And that signal chat was a mistake. I'm not here to impugn your character. You were all nominated by the president. You were all confirmed by the president. But we have an awesome responsibility and incredible responsibility to the American people. And then given that we are the United States of America, we have a responsibility to the world. And this really was a breach of protocol. I'll take you at your word that we are going to do a full investigation of it. Our responsibility as oversight is to understand this breach, understand who leaked information, how that happened, and then hold those responsible. You know, I 100% agree with the chairman in his opening statement. He said, where trust is breached, those responsible need to be held accountable. So do I have, you know, Director Gabbard, we served together, we came into Congress together. Do I have your word when this investigation is fully completed, we will get the full breadth of the investigation?
Thank you, Congressman. That would be my intent. I will caveat that by saying that this is being conducted by the National Security Council. I've not gotten any indication that they would try to withhold that, but I can't speak for them.
Okay. I also, you know, I see way too much politics when it comes to our national security and our national defense. We've got to keep politics out of this. We're not Democrats or Republicans. We're Americans. We're tasked with the responsibility of keeping our country safe. Director Gabbard, you have an awesome responsibility here to advise the president, to collate all the information, everything that the IC is providing, and provide that best advice and guidance to the President of the United States. We have to keep politics out of this. Even if the President disagrees with this, if it goes against his personal wishes, if he's considering an order that potentially is unconstitutional or illegal or compromises our security, I want your word that you will always provide and give that honest advice to the President, even if it will make him angry.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate the question because, as you said, I do take this responsibility very seriously. And it was my commitment to the President, to the Senate, the American people, that as the Director of National Intelligence, I will ensure to provide the President and all of you as policymakers with that unbiased, relevant, and timely intelligence. And to your specific question, the answer is yes. I will inform the President of that accurate, timely, unbiased intelligence reporting, whether it is something that agrees with an assumption or a view or an objective or not. That's my responsibility to him and to the American people.
Great. I would just offer advice. In your role, what you do on your personal devices versus your official devices, you're speaking to the public, and I would just offer, you know, as I conduct myself, what I say personally is always going to be considered Congressman Barra saying it. General Haugh, I've appreciated working with you and, you know, have a deep concern about our cyber vulnerabilities. And we will go into some of this in the closed session. But Salt Typhoon is something we take very seriously, as well as Volt Typhoon and the compromises. Can you just briefly give us an update of where we are with those two?
So, Congressman, we share your concern in terms of the overall ensuring that we can protect the critical infrastructure of the United States. The area that we have been deeply focused on is our ability to partner with industry. 99% of our critical infrastructure is controlled by our industry. So our ability to bring government information to be able to understand what threats look like and the origin of those threats, help inform how industry can defend that and also create the necessary equipment to ensure that we're secure. That partnership continues to grow, and that's really one of our key priorities. And I'll be able to go in closed session into more detail about the specific actions we've done together as an interagency with our industry teammates.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. A gentleman from Pennsylvania, General Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance and your service to national security for our country. I'm going to start with Director Patel and then go to Director Gabbard. I'm concerned, like many Americans, about the wide-scale purchase of land, real estate, et cetera, by the Chinese Communist Party or those sanctioned by the party in America, especially those lands proximate to sensitive military sites or sensitive national security sites. Director Patel, I think we can all understand that that could lead to the ease of nefarious activities of numerous sorts. What do you think should be our posture or our policy from a national security standpoint regarding the purchases of these land and the ownership, occupation, utilization, et cetera, by the Communist Party sanctioned use?
Well, Congressman, I appreciate the question, and I'm not going to shape foreign or national policy, but from the FBI perspective, if we had federal statutes to enact criminal allegations and pursue those relating to these matters, we would do so. I agree with you that having CCP actors purchasing large swaths of land next to military installations is a national security issue, a major one, and I would highlight to the American public, we're not allowed to buy farmland in mainland China or in Russia. So I don't know why we let that happen here, but that's a personal matter for me. If I were given more legislation on it, I would love to act on it.
Thank you. Director Gabbard, I'm going to look at, keeping with the same theme, crypto mining by the sanction. Well, you can't crypto mine in China, right? It's outlawed in China. However, of course, we're supportive of crypto, I am, in the United States of America, but China's mining in America where they can't mine in China. And in particular, I'm thinking about one site where the mining was occurring close to intercontinental ballistic missiles, and CFIUS was tipped off by Microsoft. And of course, there are actions ongoing. Should the Chinese Communist Party, sanctioned individuals or interests, be allowed to crypto mine near sensitive military or national security sites in the United States of America? And if not, what should we be doing about it?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. I'm not fully aware and up to date on the specific example that you've mentioned, and I'll go and look into that and get back to you further.
Right.
Absolutely. Look forward to having the conversation with you. Broadly, this is obviously a concern, that any of these activities occurring near or around any of our military sites creates that potential national security risk and the potential for foreign intelligence collection.
I'm hoping it's a priority for everybody on the dais there. It is a priority, I think, for the American people, certainly for me. I want to move on in the time remaining with a related topic, which is the hundreds of incidents by predominantly Chinese students, oftentimes called gate crashers. So this includes the two gentlemen in uniform on the dais. I'm going to kind of point to three events that happened just last year. One in Grayling, Michigan. 5 Chinese students are charged for lying and concealing evidence. One in the University of Minnesota, where a drone flew over Newport News and took pictures of classified information regarding ships and classified systems. And then one at the University of Florida regarding the illicit acquisition and shipment of toxins, biomedical drugs, and research supplies to China. In these cases, or most of these cases, we encounter these people and then we release these people. As a matter of fact, in the case of Florida, apparently she found out that criminal charges were being prepared and she dropped out of school and her whereabouts remain unknown at this point. What should be our posture? Because we're trying to follow up after the fact. We're encountering these people, whether they're gate crashers or whether we catch them conducting this illicit activity. We try and prosecute. That takes a lot of man hours, as you know, Director Patel. Is this the best policy, or is there something better that we can do? I mean, the Immigration Nationality Act of 1952 gives the Secretary of State the authority to revoke visas. But should these people be allowed to come to this country in the first place is the question, and what should our posture be? Anybody?
In terms of the visa issue, I know that the administration is working on a policy, but to directly answer your question, anybody who utilizes the student visa program to come to this country to conduct criminal activity should never be allowed in this country. And anyone that's doing it here in the United States of America from an FBI standpoint will be vigorously investigated and will use the expulsion or criminal process on them.
I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the witnesses. First let me say that we do have to, in this committee, try as much as possible to remain nonpartisan as opposed to bipartisan. I can recall being that way when I was counsel on the House Ethics Committee, and it's a hard position to take. But I'm really struck by the fact that in December of 2023, many people made Secretary Lloyd Austin go through the stages of the cross in self-flagellation and mea culpas for not informing the president that he was having a surgery. And now how we're treating Secretary Hedgepeth as if he is untouchable. Mike Waltz, when he was a member of Congress, went in the Committee on Armed Services to talk about and slammed Austin for holding himself to a different standard than the American people. And yet we are not doing this across the board. And that's disappointing, at the very least, very disappointing. Director Gabbard, thank you for your testimony. And one of the things that I believe I heard you say was that when there was a discussion by DOJ as to the cuts to foreign aid, that there had not been a request for an intelligence and national security or an intelligence assessment of the impact of those cuts. Was that your testimony a little earlier?
Congresswoman, I have not seen any kind of actual official assessment either within the intelligence community or outside of it on what the effects of those cuts to USAID programs has been.
But it was not requested by DOJ of you or of any of the areas in which you have oversight over?
I'm not aware of any requests.
Okay, great. Thank you. I know that there has been some open source reporting on what the effect of those cuts are. I mean, when we think about several examples, Kenya, our strongest regional ally in the Horn of Africa, and a key partner with us in the fight against terrorist group Al-Shabaab. And, according to the Washington Post, that's not definitive, and we can talk about this in closed session. Some Kenyan journalists are now being trained by Beijing, mirroring the U.S. programs that have been cut by the administration. Director Gabbard, is letting China train Kenyan journalists going to make Kenya more or less receptive to American requests of the Kenyan government, do you believe?
As you said, Congresswoman, our relationship with Kenya has been very long-standing.
So do cuts of ours to train journalists in Kenya make them more or less, and Beijing having that make them more or less receptive?
Clearly there is strategic competition taking place. I'll withhold my personal view to look at an official assessment.
Well, I was asking for your director view, not your personal view. And then additionally, we have ended Voice of America, which provided accurate, unbiased news, in our opinion. Meanwhile, St. Petersburg University has announced that it's opened 11 Russian language centers across Africa that pay special attention to the promotion of traditional Russian spiritual and moral values. Director Gabbard, is Russia a friend or a foe? Are they our friend or our adversary?
They are an adversary.
Thank you. I believe that this reckless cuts make terrorism and our influence in Africa, which is on the front lines of terrorism, a real threat to us, and we need to be careful of it. Director Patel, one of the benefits of being here kind of in the middle is I get to hear other people's testimony and the questions that are asked. I know that Mr. Carson asked you questions specifically about the Counterterrorism Division. And we know that there has been some open source reporting that says that individuals within that division have been removed or been moved, not necessarily fired, but moved. Do you know if that is correct?
I don't have any personal information on that, but people within the CTD component, which is a large component of the FBI, move all the time.
And have they been moved? Are you able to get that information to us, whether they have or have not been moved?
I'll go back to my team and see who has been moved. If you have a particular interest, we'll share it with you.
Of course, we have an interest in counterterrorism division and movement of individuals within that. Because one of the other things I'm concerned about is you have stated, I believe in other areas, that the disbandment of certain sections of the FBI related to intel and breaking up components. Can you explain to us how you intend to do that, or what you would like to do and why?
My intention is to reprioritize counterintelligence authorities and cyber capabilities to focus on violent crime and national security, and that's what I'm doing.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Missouri, Madam Ambassador, Ms. Wagner.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all of you for being here and for your continued service to our country. Director Ratcliffe, you have repeatedly stated that China is our top national security threat, and I agree. What was the biggest gap in intelligence collection toward China during the previous administration?
Good to see you, Congresswoman. I think our collection against China as a hard target in the prior administration was lacking in several areas. I would say primarily in human collection, and also with regard to the processing of open source information relating to China. I think part of that relates, Congresswoman, to the policies of the prior administration about treating China as a pacing competitor, I think was the word, as opposed to an adversary. So one of the things in my focus as CIA director, which carried over from my time as DNI, in seeing all of our intelligence, seeing that China is our greatest geopolitical threat,
Yes.
and focusing the CIA specifically more directly in all areas of our collection on China as a hard target.
Well, and I'm grateful to hear you say the words open source. So as I hope that all of you may be aware, I am honored to be the chair of the new Open Source Intelligence Subcommittee for HPSI. It is the first time this committee has focused specifically on an intelligence discipline, I'll say. We established this subcommittee because private companies, researchers, and most importantly, foreign adversaries, as we speak, are taking full advantage of the explosion of commercially available information. HPSI has taken a stance that OSINT, open source intelligence, should mature as a primary discipline on its own accord. Director Ratcliffe, your agency kind of produces the lion's share, I'd say, of OSINT. Do you agree, sir, that open source intelligence should mature to be a primary discipline?
Absolutely agree. So as you know well, Congresswoman, the CIA is the functional manager for OSINT, just as we are the functional manager for HUMINT across the IC. And OSINT, open source intelligence, reaches, frankly, policymakers as the most cited material in the President's daily brief as part of a long list of tailored production that we do. By a large percentage. But also, as you know, and as you've pointed out, Congressman, until recently, one of the greatest weaknesses with regard to OSINT was that the collection was so large that it was daunting for use by mission partners across the IC. So the CIA's open source enterprise pioneered the use of AI to triage that comes in. And what that allows us to do is to summarize collection from over 225 languages into English and to put that in the hands of policymakers, again, showing that the CIA is focused on using technology to tackle some of the challenges to intelligence collection.
There is so much innovation in technology in this, and the investments being made across the IC to purchase data, but it appears to be in silos, to be perfectly honest, and lacking maybe an integrated approach. I believe that that is because there, frankly, is no clear lead for OSINT in the IC. And as part of my oversight responsibilities, I plan to review the various ways in which the intelligence community buys commercially available information to determine if there is a more efficient, cost-effective approach, especially when it comes to the taxpayer's expense. Director Gabbard and then Director Ratcliffe, can you, and in my brief time, quickly share your thoughts on which agency should be the primary organization to manage OSINT and why?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your leadership in this area. I look forward to following up with you in detail, but the Office of Director of National Intelligence is tackling exactly the problem that you've identified, that we have multiple elements across the intelligence community essentially wasting taxpayer dollars by contracting separately to get after the same collection of OSINT and commercially available intelligence. So this is something we're actively working on and look forward to working with you.
And do you agree with Director Ratcliffe that this should be a key discipline?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. My time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to make a few things clear before we move on to other questions regarding the signal chat. Director Gabbard, yesterday before the Senate Intelligence Committee, specifically when answering Senator Kelly, you repeatedly said you did not